Lyle Fong.
Hey everybody. So it's been about 2 months since I've been in Europe. So this is all new for me, and it's like great to see all of you. And I've been super impressed with the family so far as I've been kind of traveling around Europe and getting to know the startup ecosystems. What I thought I'd do today was kind of share with you a story of the journey that I went through in learning stuff that in the beginning no one really told me, and despite all the advice and all the mentors I've had over the years, some of this stuff, and maybe this is me, so I'm just kind of someone who doesn't learn by going to a lecture, going to school. I kind of just run my head against the wall enough times to learn. And that's kind of been my kind of MO my entire career. And I got lucky a little bit. But I thought I'd share with you some of these stories, so hopefully you won't have to make the same mistakes that I did. So a little bit about me. So I'm from San Francisco, and there I've started 4 companies. You may not even call some of them companies because they're really stupid things that we just incorporated. But luckily some of them worked out. The last 2 years prior to coming to Europe, I was a visiting partner at YC. And that was really eye-opening for me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so this is what I should have been doing. I can't believe these people are learning, and they know how to do things that I wish I knew when I was starting my companies. But after that, I decided to move to Europe, and London specifically. And I now am I kind of joined the dark side as a VC at a company called EQT Ventures. And it's a lot of fun, but it's still odd for me to be on that side of the fence, and I still kind of like associate myself with being an entrepreneur more than anything else. So what I thought we would talk about today, and some of the things that I wanted to kind of share with you, are some lessons on, I think, the absolute core thing, because everything kind of is built off of this pillar, is like, how do you know if you've actually gotten product market fit? This is something that more often than not people think they have, and yet because they don't, all these other problems get amplified. But assuming that you do, then how do you actually build a business? And in the early days, it's about communication, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then after you grow a little bit further, you start thinking about things like, is culture important, and how you're supposed to think about culture. And coming from bigger companies, we see like, oh, there's like this core values that they post everywhere, and then it's on the walls everywhere, but yet it doesn't seem like everyone's living this. And so some of us, like me, kind of got jaded by all this and said, no, I don't want to do any of that kind of stuff because it felt very big company. But it is important, and it is actually quite difficult. And then as you go a little further, you start realizing that you need to do and learn something called leadership, which that is something that in the beginning, we don't have to worry about, right? We're just trying to build a product. We're trying to figure out how to build stuff. I come from an engineering background, so I'm sitting there coding. And then all of a sudden, if something starts going well, you're thinking about, well, crap, how do I manage a team? And then management is not even the issue. The issue is like, how do you lead a team? And that is also something that I found really hard to learn. And then the last point I was going to try to share with you is, it's an odd one because, obviously everyone knows, like, if you've been doing startups for a while, yeah, we need to focus, but yet I would say that most companies that I have, the honor of meeting, they think they're doing focus, and that they think they're like trying to be really good about this, but oftentimes they're not. And I'll share with you the stories that I went through in learning this kind of the hard way as well. So I thought I'd start from the very beginning because I think it will give you some context, and this is the only picture I could find from this time, which is in the dorms in school. So it's kind of embarrassing. I'm going to try to switch the slides real fast. In college, I used to love building computers. So I would like take my computer apart and build it. That was like my hobby. I did it all the time, and then some dorm mates of mine kept walking by my room and saying, what the heck are you doing? Why are you doing all this? And they started getting fascinated, and one thing led to another, and we decided, hey, how cool would it be to start a company selling computers to students? Now, any of you who know how hard it is to build a computer in terms of just the amount of labor that's involved and how small the margins are and how the big companies do this so much better would realize that this is a really dumb business idea. But I don't know, this is like what we were thinking about. And the reason I was really sucked into it was because this is like first year in college. I hate school. I never wanted to go to school. I'm terrible at school, so there's people who are really good at it, and I really admire those people, but I'm not one of those. And then it was like the first time with Tiger Mom parents, I called my mom and said, hey, you know, a few friends and I want to start a company. And I was like so surprised when then she said, oh, that's like so cute. Yeah, why don't you do that? And let me take a semester off. And of course, since then, I never went back to school. But the point was, like, it was like my motivation. And in a lot of ways, you can also imagine how a lot of founders, a lot of my friends, the reason we start companies, obviously, is something that drives us. A lot of times is because we don't think like average people. And if you're really good at academics, for example, and you can get great grades and go to a great school and then maybe go to grad school, like your options are pretty high. Like there's companies offering you jobs. Well, if you suck at school, then we don't really have much options. So in my mind, I also felt that this is like something I must do, despite the fact that we're not getting paid, or despite the fact that it's grueling and all that. I as well as a lot of my friends, didn't feel like we had much of an option. So we went about doing this. As a few friends, we decided to start by posting basically flyers all over campus saying, oh, we have this computer that you can buy, and it's student discount. It's really catered to students, so it's pretty cheap. And then every so often, someone would call us and place an order. We would drive all over the Bay Area. So we were in Berkeley, driving down to San Jose. For any of you who know the Bay Area, that's not a short drive. The traffic is terrible. Even without traffic, it's over an hour. We drive all over the place, picking up parts, driving it back to our dorms, assembling this thing. And then after you assemble it, you got to test it, install the right software, and all this kind of stuff. And initially it was really fun. We thought this was so cool. And since we were all friends, this was basically our life. Then we started realizing, wait, crap, why is it that we're not making any money? And then we realized, oh, well, there's this thing called inventory and cost of support, and the driving around takes time and gas. And so essentially we thought that we were making about $100 per computer that we sold. Actually, we were most of the time losing money. So it was a terrible idea and a terrible business. But the one thing I learned from this on hindsight, not then, but on hindsight, was that one of the biggest problems that we had was that because we were a bunch of friends, there was 4 of us, we were always really trying to be nice to each other. We avoided conflict. We didn't talk to each other in hey, I think that what we're doing here is wrong. Here's I think how we can improve. We didn't have any conversations like that, and certainly didn't talk about things like how we felt about the business. Do we think this is a good business? At different moments in time, some of us might be working really, really hard, and then we look at the other person and we're like, dude, that person's just going out or playing games. And feeling a little bit resentful and unfair, but we didn't vocalize this. And as a result, the company was kind of not very functional. It'd be I put in a lot of effort for these 2 weeks and going really hard, and then another person is basically playing games the whole time. Then that person is starting to work, doing something totally different, and then I'm mad at this point and passive aggressive, so I'm not doing anything. And oddly, this is something that we see across a lot of companies. And so one of the number one failures for early stage companies, and I've seen this now many, many times, is when people are together in the early team, they don't communicate enough and they don't communicate properly. And at YC, Amy who is this amazing person there. She was our batch director. I think she now recently left YC to start her own basically coaching practice. But she kind of put it this way, and so I'm taking her words here, but I thought it was a really good way to frame the problem, which is there's different levels of communication. Starting from if you think about level 1 communications is how we normally talk to people we just met, or even how we talk to coworkers. We're not talking about anything really serious and down to the core. We're kind of trying to stay at the surface because it's easier to stay at that level. Level 2 communications, it gets a little more risky. Maybe you're now not really happy, but then instead of telling people directly that you don't think that we're going in the right direction, we instead start, being passive aggressive. We try to beat around the bush, and we're just not, because we don't want to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. But the best teams, the first thing you need to figure out is how you can have level 3 communications where you're really opening up your heart, you're being completely transparent and honest, and even though it's hard to say, and even though we try as humans to avoid conflict most of the time, to have those conversations, and that is something that in the very, very early stage matters more than probably anything else, because together as a team you can do great things, but if you're at each other and you're worried about internal stuff, then, and internal, it's not politics, it's just conflict, but it's one of the easiest ways for companies to die. So I wanted to start there, because that was like an example of a terrible company that was very small, that never really picked up. And because we didn't have the right communications, and we weren't open, and part of it was because we were friends from before, although you would think that because we were friends, we should be even more open to this. Now I learned that. But it's an example of that, where because of this, we ended up not doing, we all split up and started doing different things. So every one of us started different companies, and we couldn't really work together, for a while after that. So the reason I was building these computers, though, and the reason I was taking my partner computers all the time, was because I was really into games. My brother and I grew up playing games. We were very competitive with each other. And of course, if you want an edge in games, and this is PC hardcore games, you kind of need the fastest computer. So that's kind of what I was mostly doing as a hobby, and then it turned into a stupid business. But then the real reason is, games, and we kind of got a little bit lucky there. So my brother and I were so competitive that when finally some of these games became more popular and people were playing it across, at least the US and then later on the world, the internet, of course, made it easier to play anyone from anywhere. We played this game called Quake, and in this game, which probably most of you don't know, this game was kind of like it's like a first-person shooter. You're trying to kill the other person, and my brother got so good at it that he was in the Guinness Book of World Records. He won a Ferrari when he was a little kid, playing in a tournament, which still is the largest individual prize in any esports tournament. We believed because of this that we were at the forefront of esports. So we're like, holy crap! With all the publicity and all this, we should try to build a business around it. So we started a company called Gamers.com. And first of all, never work with your brother. But still, on the surface, it sounded like it worked. It should have been great because he and I are so complementary. I'm an engineer, kind of the person who does the stuff. He's really great at marketing and PR and all that. So theoretically, we should be very complementary. But it was really hard because we were also so competitive with each other, and we're not listening to each other. But we started this company, and we tried to, we were kind of hidden away. We weren't in the Silicon Valley proper where everything was happening. We were kind of remote up in Berkeley, and there was there's certainly no startup scene up in Berkeley at the time. And we were trying to figure out ways to make money. So we wrote books, really stupid strategy guides where we get advance on royalty for people who pay us, publishers would pay us, a few thousand to write a book. And these are just books on how to walk through a game. It's really basic stuff. We ran tournaments, so we ran this thing called a PGL, which is a professional gamers league where people would compete. We built a site, and our goal and our vision was to build up this site, which is everything for games, had every game in there and all this kind of stuff. So we were doing this, building it up. We got advertising revenue, also sponsorship revenue, because people wanted to be, there was some big companies like Microsoft and Logitech and so on who wanted to be associated with kind of this trend of hardcore gaming. So we built this thing up, and it was growing. We actually got to 2 to 3 million in revenue, and then but we were really young and a small little company. A VC came up to us and gave us a term sheet, wouldn't let us leave the room until we signed the term sheet. We didn't know anything about VCs except we knew that this VC was a well-known one and had some pretty big successes. We're like, oh shit, this is it. Like now we've, like, I don't know, for some reason at that time we thought if you get VC money, like that's the end, you're like done. And so we raised a lot, and then we had our first board meeting, which was an eye-opening experience. So here we were a small company still, I don't know, maybe at most 20 people. VCs came in and said, all right, you guys, congrats on building what you've built so far, but you're doing this totally wrong. We have a playbook that has worked, and you can, several times before, and you need to follow this playbook. One, you need to spend money much faster, because we were profitable at the time, because we're bootstrapped, we have to be. And then we're gonna bring in a CEO to give you guys some adult supervision. And then, so they did. And then, so we interviewed this, they brought in the CEO, we interviewed this person, and we're like, oh my gosh, this person's like resume was so amazing, president of some of the biggest gaming companies, and then he was telling us a sob story about how his wife had died, and we were so touched by this. We thought this is such a great guy. Anyway, he came on board, even though I don't think we really had a choice whether or not he would be there. Like, we at least were given this perception that we had a choice. And then very quickly, it was like the company was growing like crazy. We didn't care about revenue anymore. All we cared about was spending money, so we spent all of our time trying to find fancy offices. We were looking for, what's the best chairs, what's the best desks to buy. I mean, basically all the stuff that doesn't matter, hiring up to hundreds of people, burning over $1 million a month, doing things like, ads for Super Bowl and all that kind of stuff. And, it's like, no wonder if you look back at it now, like that's like a pretty stupid thing to be doing, because we're not actually doing the thing that matters, which is growing our users and then ultimately making them love our product so that we can grow our revenue. We built a lot of stuff. We were working really hard, but we were kind of all fragmented, and the culture was like getting really bad. That thing exploded, and basically we were left with nothing. And we sat there, my brother and I were like, holy crap, we just went through this like really crazy up and down. Yet at this time, we still haven't learned lessons of like, how do you actually scale a business? What were we supposed to do? We just knew that this thing seemed to have so much potential. We had a freaking awesome domain name, and yet this was, turned out to be worthless. And then so from there, we were like a little afraid. We're like, first of all, like, crap, man, we should have done some more diligence on what the heck it means to take money from a VC. What do they want out of the business? Aligning our visions. We didn't know any of that kind of stuff. But it was like my first taste of kind of what it's like to grow a company from really small and then doing like hyper growth, except in the absolute wrong way, right? Hiring a bunch of people, but not for a good, strong, strategic reason. And but one of the saving graces was that for this site, we had built a community. It was like basically, if you dumbed it down, you can call it like forums. It's not the most sexy thing in the world, but at the time, I was really proud of it because I was, as a gamer, I wanted to build basically forums for gamers, and that has a very, hardcore tinge to it. And it was really random, but then someone from Dell contacted me and said, hey, I've been using your site, I've been playing with your forums, and I think this could work for Dell. Would you mind licensing it to me? And so I was like, dude, that's like so cool, because some big company wants to use this thing that I built. And so I'm like, sure. And then, they didn't pay us much. It was in the days when it was still okay for somebody at Dell to just run it under his desk, so basically without going through all the IT normal kind of like checks and stuff, and it worked out really well. This is kind of the first version of it. It was initially it was called Dell Talk, and then this thing started picking up steam, and people started talking about it as, wow, it's like pretty cool that there's a company like that Dell would allow their customers to post and talk about whatever the heck they wanted on their own website. Like, this was kind of pre-Facebook and all this kind of stuff, so it was relatively revolutionary. And there was a mention in books and stuff. So we're like, oh, this is like starting to be interesting. What if we spun this out and made it a business. And that's kind of how I started this company called Lithium. Lithium is like software, for large companies, and we provide them social media and community software, essentially. But we started off essentially as pretty much just forums to these companies. And in the early days, we took a group of us who were part of gamers. We left and started this company. And from there, we were sitting there trying to figure out product market fit. Are there other companies like this who want to buy? And we were so scared of VC money at this time, we decided to bootstrap it. We didn't want to raise any more money. And then so most of us were just sitting there building product, and a lot of the product was, we kind of listened to some of the customers that we had. They told us they needed this or that, and we do that. Some of it was more custom in the early days, like we literally camped out at Dell for months, sitting there trying to build stuff specifically to meet their needs. And but then we would talk to anyone who wanted it. So literally, we had companies like Dell using us for a more customer service use case, customers asking questions that other customers can answer. We had companies like Sephora, well, that's a little later, but regardless, Sephora was using it for people to share beauty and makeup tips. We had later on Home Depot that was using us for people at home and doing home improvement projects. We had media companies using it for whatever the shows were really popular. People can talk about their shows or talk about football. So basically, everyone if there was anyone who'd be willing to talk to us, we would talk to them. And we thought this was really cool because it showed that our product was really horizontal and it applied to a lot of use cases across a lot of vertical industries. And we slowly grew to about $8 million in annual recurring revenue. It sounds a little high, but that took like 5 years. So you can't grow that fast when you're bootstrapped because you can only spend what you got. And so we grew to around that point. And in some ways we were lucky we did, because that was during this a lot of this explosion around .com. So even if we tried to raise money, probably we wouldn't be able to. That other VC thankfully went out of business now, but at the time they probably would have not been very happy with us. So I don't think they would have given us any money. And culture at this time was really easy because we're a group of, between 6 to 15 people, and we're all sitting in the exact same office, really, really tightly packed together. And we didn't need to go do things like say what our core values was, because you can just see it from the behaviors of everybody around you. So managing a business at this time is not something we worried about much. And we were more or less trying to figure out where do we fit in the landscape? Who are we trying to sell to? And are we actually selling enterprise software? Which at the time, coming from consumer and gaming, I was very anti, enterprise software. When I was thinking about enterprise software, I was thinking about companies like Oracle and stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to do that, and that sounds terrible, and so I was kind of resisting that too. But one day, we had some customers, and one day we had one of our really favorite customers, who it was a mid-level buyer who had bought our stuff, and the community was amazing. It hit all the metrics. It was one of the most successful ones we had. Lots and lots of people were using it, thousands and thousands of people in any given hour. And so we're this is our poster child for what a really amazing community could be like if you did it right. And our buyer was also super happy with us. But then we got a call one day from that buyer who was almost in tears, saying hey, I'm really sorry, but we're switching to someone else. And we're how could that be? We thought we were doing so well, and you like us, and we talk almost every week. But essentially what happened was a competitor of ours, who was way better at selling than us, knew how to sell high, went to the CMO and basically convinced the CMO that they needed enterprise-wide community that was not just for the external, which is what we focused on. We dealt with customers, but our competitor claimed, well, yeah, we can do that, but where you're really going to get the value is internal community amongst your employees. And they of course charge like 10x what we charge too, and we were so like shocked from this that it was like the first time we realized, oh crap, actually, like we are in enterprise software, whether we like it or not, and it's something that we know nothing about. And social media was now starting to go crazy. Facebook, Twitter, all this stuff was starting to get really big. Companies were thinking more about this now, and so we decided, okay, well, if our competitor, and that was not just one, there was several of them who all raised a lot of money. Our biggest competitor raised from Sequoia, and so we're like, crap, well, we better raise from someone well-known too, and so one of our investors was Benchmark. But basically, it was like an arms race of like who has more funding, and so that's kind of what forced us into raising money. Of course, this time around, I was like much more careful in saying like I want to make sure I pick the right VC, someone who is actually a partner to me and our business, and we made sure we spent a lot of time doing diligence, reference calls to make sure we're aligned, and they were great. So if you kind of like follow their journey so far. The early days was trying to figure out product market fit. We thought we had product market fit because we have 8 million in recurring revenue. Like, duh, we have product market fit was kind of how I was thinking. And from the backs of that, with a big market growing, we're like, okay, we're going to raise a lot of money, and we did. And then the next phase of our growth was, okay, so the VCs, the first board meeting now, they go, dude, you guys, congratulations, you guys are awesome. Now grow and scale this thing, and set really high targets, triple if you can. And so usually our targets was like, you need to figure out whatever you did, you need to triple that. And so for me, that was like, okay, that means we probably need to hire in every function. I didn't know anything. I mean, I'm an engineer, so I don't know anything about sales. So like, well, how do I hire a salesperson? And I have to learn really fast about that and try to look for someone who can head sales. And then I'm like, okay, well, we also need marketing. So what the heck does that look like? Accounting, finance, like none of these things were things that I've ever had to deal with or learn in my past. So then trying to figure out actually what we need, and then how do you even tell when you're recruiting someone if this person is good or not, became like a pretty darn big challenge. Thankfully, I would just ask my board members to help in a lot of cases, and then we did the thing that people shouldn't do, which is we put a lot of emphasis on pedigree. So, oh, this person had come from these great schools. Oh, this person had worked at Amazon or was early days at Adobe or whatever. And so from those like kind of big names, we would say like, oh yeah, then they must be good. This turned out not to be the case, and it's one of the biggest learnings I've had about that. But regardless, we were like trying to build our team and build, basically hire for all these functions that I basically have never been really exposed to before. And even though there's a lot of chaos at this time and we're hiring people and trying to figure out how they fit and trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, our main goal was, okay, we need to grow sales because that's what the VCs told us we need to do. And people generally, despite us having a lot of things were changing all the time, people stayed with the company, and we had churn was not an issue amongst our employees because it's still a small group. I mean, when you're growing 50 to even up to 50 people, if you're all in the same office, then still you have an opportunity to meet every new employee. You have a chance to interview every new person coming in, and they get to watch and see how people are operating to understand, what is the behaviors that's normal in this company. And at this time, we were also still very proud of the fact that we had our customers all over the place and in every industry. And, actually our sales did grow. And so the VCs were still very happy with us. Now that's like the good side. But the thing that was happening at the same time, and on hindsight, it's like so obvious, but it was not obvious to me at the time. We had hired all these, we hired a VP of sales, and then we hired all these salespeople. And then in the US, probably just like here, salespeople are super expensive. Enterprise, you can be talking about all in, one person could cost upwards of $200K US. And so if you make a mistake on these hires, it's like pretty bad. But anyway, we were hiring these people, and we thought we were like recruiting them in the right way. We were like, hey, so how long have you been doing sales? How much experience do you have in sales? Did you have, how did you hit your quotas in the last few years? Usually there's a term called President's Club. So the ones that are really good would say, yeah, I was in President's Club 4 years in a row, which means they were a top performer at their last companies, like 4 years in a row. And, but the problem was like most of our salespeople couldn't actually sell. Like despite giving the ramp, giving them 6 months ramp or 9 months ramp to get up to speed on our products or whatever it is, most people were not able to hit numbers. And so at the time we're like, oh, well, though, of course, if they're not hitting numbers, it must be because they're the wrong people. Look, we have this one person who is hitting numbers, so we just need, so it's proof that we can find people who are. And then so we would basically churn out our sales team and try to keep finding these type of people that were doing well. And then we looked at the type of people who were doing well, and we're like, crap, how do we find people like this? They were like very oddball types. Their profile and background were not the standard types that you would find in sales. So it's even on LinkedIn or whatever you're using, it's hard to find. And although we were growing in sales, like what we were doing was actually not repeatable. Like if you looked at, like on hindsight again, you looked at the numbers, what we would have found was our sales cycle was all over the place, like 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, but no regularity in any of this. Our win rate was kind of the same always. It's like, I think it was like 33% or something like that, and it wasn't improving or changing in any way. And then as we now have customers that have been with us for a while, some of them, and then eventually a lot of them started churning out. And, but we were like, oh, this must be an execution problem. Like it must be because we hired the wrong people. It must be because we don't have like performance reviews and OKRs and all this kind of stuff done right. So then we started focusing heavily on this. We even tried some crazy thing, which I don't recommend anyone do, but there's like a book at the time that was very popular called Top Grading. Which is like basically every quarter or so, you look at you stack rank all the people in the company, and then you reward the top ones, and you kind of basically actively push out the bottom ones. And we tried all kinds of different things, thinking it was execution that was actually causing the issue. And it wasn't really it. Overall, like because like we were spending so much time and so much effort in selling and money, like our sales still kind of grew, but it was kind of like pushing a boulder up a hill, and that boulder just kept getting bigger and bigger and heavier. And then on top of all that, like as you're scaling and you're bringing in new executives, and then, I had a bunch of co-founders and early employees, and then in the early days, everyone has a VP title, and then now we're trying to bring in, people who like, actually came from that. They were VPs, they want to be a VP or a C-level, and then having to have those conversations with, some of these people are friends or people that have just been loyal and working with me for many years. Like that was also really painful. I had many more cases where I did this wrong, because either I would try to keep them in the role for longer because I'm like, I'm just stubborn and I don't want to change that. And that was bad because it held the company back. And then in some cases, I try to move too quickly and not sensitive enough to the feelings and needs of these people, and then ended up these people becoming resentful or leaving. There's a couple cases where maybe it was done better, where we had set expectations. But the lessons that I learned from this period from like the 15 to 50 people kind of range was product market fit is like something that is really hard to figure out. And when we're in the middle of it and we drink our own Kool-Aid and we're like, dude, look at this. So we have so many customers and they're, and look at our revenue, we oftentimes mistake that for product market fit. But what I learned is, like, if you really want to be honest about it, like, do you have like any sense of pull from your customers? Is this solving a need that they really are dying to solve? Or is it something that's a nice to have where because of salesmanship, maybe, or relationships, they end up buying from us? And in our case, it was a lot of that. Like most of the sales were, founders were involved. we started getting pretty good at kind of talking about stuff with them and trying to map, like the term is called provocation-based selling. We didn't know that then either. But provocation-based selling is basically, you walking into a meeting with some maybe C-level execs and you're trying to figure out what their problems are, and then you're trying to map and say, like, maybe have you thought about solving that problem using community? And you try to make that connection, and they see you as a trusted advisor because you're telling them and advising them things that they didn't know, or their people are not telling them, and then as a result, they end up buying. But it's because it's like you're trying to map what we have as a product to what they're actually needing. Sometimes that means there's more custom work than we need to have. Is that, do we have a product that is like repeatable? Well, we're making too many customizations to a lot of these products. And some of these people buy it, and then the people that are assigned to actually implement it, they're like, what the heck is this? Why do we buy this? And in some use cases, we were actually okay, and some of them were terrible, like it just didn't work. And then customers would ask us, like, hey, we want some extra, these features that are specific for us, but then we're like, crap, that's like a lot of work, and we want to stay horizontal, so because we want to stay horizontal, we're going to resist and not build those +1 features that would make their lives better. And so the net of that is, like, on hindsight, we didn't really have product market fit, and the easiest way to tell this is by the metrics. Like, it's supposed to be a case where every time you sell one customer, like the next customer becomes a little easier, the next one gets a little easier. And certainly, if you look at it from a sales perspective, like one of the problems that we had was we hired a lot of good salespeople. Like, if you look at their track record, they were great. But why is it that they come to our company and then suddenly they can't sell anything? Like, is that their problem or our problem? And I think in a lot of cases, on hindsight, it is mostly our problem. We thought we had this like product market fit where people wanted to buy, and in actuality, it was kind of still an evangelical, visionary, custom sale that we kind of sold through sheer force of will. And a few people could do this, but that was not scalable. The other lesson I learned during this period was like the whole like transitioning, because every stage that you go through in a company, you do need what you want, and you hear this all the time if you read the Valley blogs and so on. You're looking for people who can help you solve this stage of your problem, ideally someone who's seen this stage of your growth. And so you are bringing these people on, but just like with the early employees, someone who is really great for one stage doesn't mean that they're going to be good for the next stage. There are literally people in the Valley who know that they're optimized for a certain stage, so they just they join companies at that stage, and they know ahead of time, and it's very transparent about it, but they know that they're going to eventually move to the next company once they get past that stage. But with like early employees and early founders, like that's not something we normally think about. But setting expectations for this, if I could do it again, what I should have done was make sure that people realize, like, hey, this is the stage we're about to go through. Here's like how we're going to go and transition to this. Here's the people we need in order to get to the next stage. Like, you're really, really valuable, and you've like obviously gotten us this far, but maybe in the next stage we need to find a different role for you where you can shine. And so that we can continue to scale what you've now helped us build. And those expectations I did overall very poorly, and generally founders don't do this well enough, and this is why on hindsight I realize it is something that in this kind of growth phase it's so important to do right. And then the last thing, and this is this became evident to me when I was reading this book that Reid Hoffman wrote called Blitzscaling. But what I've learned, and I've seen this also at a lot of companies that grew well, we usually start companies because we want to have more autonomy. We want to have a little anarchy. We want to do the things that we want to do, and we want to not be like these big companies where the bureaucratic process, this is like the thing that holds us down, and anything we want to do has to go through like lines of command, and it's like a really difficult thing. And so we don't want to add process if we don't have to. Well, later I'll share with you how that's not actually that bad a thing if done right, but one of the things that I learned was if you can set your culture to be really, really grounded, and strong. And that foundation is strongly rooted, meaning people know when they're in your company, like, what is the norms, because you're repeating this all the time. You're rewarding and recognizing people who are exemplifying this behavior. You're doing all the things because you know how important this is. Like, if you do this right, then you can delay all the other stuff because you don't need to write on the wall, like, here's how we make decisions, because, like, people will know because the culture is strong enough. So I think this is like one of the biggest value adds that people can do, like the biggest like amplification efforts that people can make, just putting more emphasis and more time into culture when things are so hectic in order to delay adding bureaucracy and process. So 50 to 250-ish people, this stage, obviously is a little bit further out. I'm not sure how many of you are kind of entering or in this or maybe even beyond this stage now, but I can share with you a little bit of the stuff that we had to deal with here. And so basically, where we are at the company now is sales still, like, from a top line number looks pretty good. We're either doubling or tripling, board is happy, we're burning a ridiculous amount of money. If you look at, like, we're basically losing money every time we're adding a customer probably. And we're like, no, don't worry about that, because, like, as a customer stays forever, we'll make it back after I don't know how many months or years. And so the VCs are kind of still happy with us, and they told us, yeah, keep going and scaling, and then they gave us more money, and then we would then focus more and more on, okay, now we have a bigger team, we need to hire really strong executives. So we would go out there, hire a bunch of those. We expanded beyond the US to Europe, and we were bringing in people now really, really fast. I mean, like, more than doubling our headcount, I don't know, every 6 to 12 months-ish. Like, just like, of course, we had attrition, of course, during this time too, but when we were looking at our top line numbers and we were looking at the little data that we were actually looking at, we were like, yeah, like, we were very optimistic. We're like, there's no reason why we shouldn't be setting super aggressive targets going further out. Look, we've been doubling and tripling in the last few years. It's like, why shouldn't we do this? And of course, the VCs are telling us, yeah, go do this and spend it. Don't worry about money. Just go spend it to grow, because the general Silicon Valley view, which is sometimes flawed, is that it's like a winner-take-all market. I'm not sure if ours was, but they're like, you got to grow fast and kill your competition. So we're like, okay, cool. So on the outside, people would say, yeah, this is not doing bad. But the inside was when things started getting worse and worse and worse. And the same old one came back, of course, which is like, man, like, if we had just been a little bit smarter, we would have said, why the heck is it that even now at this scale, and we're like, doing much higher ARR numbers at this time, why is it that it's still taking us that long to sell these like customers? Why is it that our churn is still like the same, which was getting kind of high? Why is it that our win rates are kind of the same? And so, like, all the normal metrics were still the same. Like, it didn't make any sense, but we kind of just like ignored that and said, that's just, how it is. And then we had, of course, other problems. Because we were not like managing the company in the right way, we had some good people leave, so we started getting attrition. When some good person leaves, it kind of creates a little panic within the company. Other people leave. The people they brought in also end up leaving. And but we're like also hiring at such a rapid pace that basically new employees who were starting typically were surrounded in their team and around their desk with people that also were brand new, less than 3 months or maybe 6 months at most. And this is like an interesting lesson that I learned, where I looked and realized that people who come into a company, usually they're excited, they have great intentions, they may be awesome. They're sitting there at their desk doing their work, they're trying to figure out on the first few days, first few weeks of the job, like, what the heck am I supposed to be doing here? And what are other people doing so I can model that behavior? But then if they're looking at other people who are also brand new, it's kind of like blind leading the blind. And so with good intentions, teams started splintering and the culture splintered. Like, groups of people would think that the norms and the way you run a business is different than other groups. And then because of that, over time, that's how politics starts. And so then, instead of actually focusing on our competition or focusing on growth and all this, we're focused on internally, how do you fix this? Crap, we need to figure out how to, keep people, and we need to figure out how to stop this. And then it got even worse during this time because we were kind of foolish and thinking that everything was going so well that we should buy companies. So we bought 4 companies, and of course these companies are very different. And in some cases, you try to assimilate them, but then it becomes like a us versus them mentality. In some cases, like we keep them and let them stay alone, but then they just operate totally differently. Like it was like a magnification of this cultural splintering issue that was becoming more and more evident as the company grew. Meaning, like, crap, we're really all working very hard, and it's not that anyone is slacking off, but yet we're like going in every which different direction. And so basically, like, things were like kind of like falling apart. And the reason why this was falling apart is that because, kind of by definition, like most of us had not gone through this before. I mean, certainly for myself, let me just say, like, I've not gone through this before. I've never managed a company before that's this size, because we're like every week we're like getting bigger and bigger. And I realized finally, from some VCs smacked me in the head and said, there's actually this thing called leadership that you need to think about. And although I heard the term before, it didn't really sink in what it actually meant. Because I've always been focused on like people who are really, really good at doing whatever the job was. Like if you're really good at marketing, or you're really good at sales, or engineer, or you're like a rock star engineer. Those are the things that I always focused on. And I wasn't thinking about like leadership. And so I got a coach. It turned out to be one of the best things I ever did. And the first thing this coach did was, and the reason I like this coach, by the way, was because this person was very data-driven. This person had spent years like studying and figuring out what are the qualities and what are the traits of the 100 best leaders in the world. And so the data-driven approach that this person had was what made me feel like, oh, this is really cool. It's not like a therapy session or something like that. And so one of the first things that we did was we did this thing that's, you've all probably heard of what a 360 is, but then it's the combination of a 360 with something else. And in his language, I'm not sure if this is like a standard language, but he called it a PLP. It's like a personality leadership profile. So basically it's a test you take yourself. And so I took it, and it asks you a whole bunch of questions that you answer in all which way. And afterwards, it gives you a report that says, you are this in terms of leadership. So it turns out there's 3 different types of leaders. So there's a visionary evangelist, someone who paints a picture of the world that is so amazing that people want to follow them no matter what. There are like leaders of execution, people who are so good at planning and organizing teams to deliver on stuff and they consistently are delivering that people love them and follow them forever. And then there are leaders of relationship. They build such strong rapport and such loyalty and trust with people that these people then follow them forever. So there's like these 3 different types. And for me, it was obviously more on the visionary evangelist side. And then the other 2 were like pretty weak, like really weak. And then he shared with me, well, here's the report of the best leaders in the world. If you want to be one of those, then the main thing you need to figure out is you need to make the area that you're strong, you need to like stay strong, but then the other 2 things cannot be below average, because if it's below average, then people literally notice this and say, this dude sucks at this thing, and then their entire impression of you is like dropped. So even the thing that you're strong in, people don't even recognize that you're strong in, because they don't give you that credit, because they focus so much that you're so crappy on this one thing. So that was one. And then the second thing was the 360. So like basically the same thing, the same questionnaire given to like my board, my peers, people who've worked with me, and then also people who work for me. And I also send it out to people who had worked for me and then had left. And they gave an assessment of what they think of me. And if you kind of like put those 2 graphs together, they obviously don't look the same. And what was taught to me was the areas which have a gap, meaning it's like, I think I'm so awesome and actually everyone says I suck, like those gaps are my blind spots. And so in working with coaching, what you're trying to figure out is like, what are your blind spots? And when you have these blind spots, and then so therefore you know what to fix. And so, for example, I was since I'm a product engineering type person, and I always pride myself on building great products. I was very perfectionistic when it came to that stuff. Like if a pixel was off, I'd be like, that pixel is off, or this padding is wrong. I'd be like, this is not right. And so we had these engineers, and then I would go up to them, and then they would be like, "Hey, I want to show you something. I just built this thing. I'm going to show you." And then I'm like pointing out all the things that's like wrong with it. And then I thought I was being quick and helping them, but in actuality, these people were just mad and they didn't want to do it anymore. And then so I went to my coach. I'm like, so this is the problem that I've been facing. Like, how am I supposed to fix it? And he says to me something that was like initially like the most shocking thing. He's like, well, there's been several studies now on this, but if you want people to actually listen to you and change, you have to have a ratio of praise to criticism at least 4-to-1. And actually, in more recent years, that number has increased to 7-to-1. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I have to say like 7 times that someone's doing something good when I don't see it. And then I was like, I don't know how to do this. And then he gave me a very pragmatic advice, which was like, dude, like, you have maybe an expectation. Let's just say from 1 to 10, your expectation is like a 7. This person did a first pass at something and they gave you a 2. But then the next time, like they went from a 2 to a 3, you can still recognize that they improved and say, hey, that was a good job on this thing because I saw that you put an effort here, and then like shut up, like because my tendency was then to say, but da 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 da, and like apparently that doesn't work. So like that was just like one of the many things I learned. Then I learned like, well, how do I like delegate properly, and how do you like empower people so that they actually, and the biggest problem here was a lot of us founders live in a world of ambiguity where like anything is possible. And so it's like, I don't want to set anything in stone, because if I set it in stone, that means I can't change it. And so the resistance to set things in stone, meaning set goals, this is what we're going to do, this was also causing angst amongst everybody else because no one else knew what the heck to do. Meanwhile, I tell them, hey, you're responsible for something, and they go off and try to do it, but because I never set the proper expectation in the first place, whatever they do, like, it's probably not to my expectation. And then now they're feeling like, dude, you just like had me go spend 2 months trying to figure this thing out, and I figured it out, and now you're telling me that's not what you really wanted, or you wanted it done differently, and it's like that kind of thing. And anyway, I can go on and on and on about all the stupid things I did here, but I tried to learn. But the most important lesson that I learned was that as we're scaling, we need stronger and stronger leaders to work for us. So, I went out and so sometimes we can hire someone who's amazing, because when we're in sales mode, they're only meeting us for a short period of time. We can like tell them how great this vision is and how awesome everything is. We're not telling them necessarily all the problems, but we're saying all the great things, and then they join. But the main thing here is whatever level you are as a leader. So, let's say if I'm a 5 as a leader from a 1 to 10 scale, basically I can only hire people who are below that. And if I am somehow like, I bamboozle this person, or I'm lucky to hire someone who is stronger than that, they don't stay long. Because like generally, like leaders only work for people who are stronger leaders than them. And this is fundamentally the reason why we as like founders who have never really, most of us, or many of us at least, never really had to learn about leadership. When our company is growing, we have to stay on top of this so much. And it is really, really hard, because literally it's not something that we get taught. And it's usually, by definition, the first time we've ever had to even see this and do this. But I spent a lot of time trying to deal with this. And on hindsight, I think I probably overcorrected even. Like, I went so far into trying to fix all the things, and like that I also lost sight of the fact that the strength that I had, I need to also further cultivate, which in the case of this company meant that I was kind of like focusing so much on sales and everything else, and less so on the product, which is where I actually have a lot of value. So we can talk more about leadership if this is something that's of interest to anybody, but I'll stop there because I literally can go on forever on this. But I think the other thing that I figured out was, and again, all this I'm saying to you on hindsight, like years later, so it's not like any of this stuff was so obvious then, but this initial culture where we are trying to move fast, we're trying to move nimble, and equating nimble with ad hoc and lack of process and all this kind of stuff. As you scale, obviously that stuff starts breaking, and then how do you set up like structures and processes like that make it so that people who come into your company know how they can be effective? And I started realizing that this isn't just bureaucracy, and it doesn't have to be like the way that big companies are. It could be very, very simple, and then of course, as I mentioned, like if your culture is strong, like you can do even less of this. But at the very least, we need to figure out like, as a new employee, you walk into a company, you're trying to figure out like, what is okay for me to do? Like, I really think that we should switch to this software system because it's like really cool. Can I do it? Or do I need like approvals from everybody? Am I stepping on someone's toes or am I not? Like all this stuff is holding people back and they're not pushing forward and they're not moving as fast. Yet if this is not said anywhere, like no one really knows. Likewise, we may have like some stupid board that says, here's our core values, but like, you read that and you're like, yeah, that's like what every company says. I don't know if that's real or not. And so you still are modeling behavior. And then if the behavior starts getting splintered, as I mentioned, like it's basically the values themselves are even meaningless. And it taught me that, first of all, like if in order to instill culture as the company scales, people are not, you get to the point where people are not able to be working with early employees all the time. They're not able to be working with founders all the time. You may not even meet the founders when you get hired, which is really bad, but I mean that happened in many cases, especially as we were expanding into other geographies. So therefore, one of the most scalable things that any of us can do, and we can do this from the very beginning, it doesn't have to be when you're at 50 employees or whatever that number is, but there are a few things that a founder CEO can do to have the greatest impact, and that is to talk directly to employees en masse. So things like town halls become so critical because if you do that once a week, basically you have an opportunity every week to get direct feedback from everyone and also continuously repeat the messages of why we're here, what our goals are, what is important to us, and what our core values are. You can use that opportunity to recognize people, even if it's the smallest thing, but to thank them for living up to our values. And here's an example of that, to set the, basically to kind of like reinforce this amongst everybody else. And so that was something that I thought was really important that I certainly wish I had learned earlier. And then near the end, of course, I was doing a lot of more of this, but other people kind of have it more naturally than I do. But the last thing here, which is like ultimately around the product market fit question, which is ultimately the biggest limiting factor of, the analogy I was like telling you was like this pushing this boulder up a hill. Now we're in like Series B, Series C territory. Valuations are going really high. Expectations are that we're going to be growing the company, continuously at a very fast clip. We're hiring salespeople and trying to grow. And what we realized was like we were just spread too thin because we were trying to maintain this horizontal approach where we sold to everyone and any industry and any use case and every geo now at this point too. We were just spread really thin, and what we were not getting was referenceability, meaning one customer like tells another customer that, hey, these guys are awesome. We didn't spend enough time in a specific use case to really make sure that use case was really, really good. And so we actually took a step back, and keep in mind here, I mean, rough numbers, I don't remember exactly, but let's just say 30 to 40 million in ARR. Like company size was pretty big. Now it's like spread all over the place. We did an exercise where we looked at our customer base and said, how can we accelerate? Because we are not accelerating the entire time. We're basically moving at the exact same pace. We're just spending more money to get more customers. And what we learned was, like, because we were selling to everyone and like anyone who wants it, we were not a must-have for any particular type of company or particular use case. And so we looked across our customer base and we found that the few that actually were like liked us, and actually were paying us a little bit more than the average, were telcos. I mean, social media to telcos is like kind of like an oddball thing, but nonetheless, these companies needed it because these telcos were like, I mean, although they're making a lot of money, like if a customer even calls them one time, usually they lose money, and so their margins on that is really thin. They spend a lot on customer service. Everyone hates like calling these big companies and these telcos for any issue, and yet the complexity of these things, like so, people are now buying their iPhones from, I don't know, Telefonica or Orange, and then sometimes expecting them to be answering questions like, hey, like, how do I install Facebook on this phone, or how do I use Facebook? Like, these customer service people are not equipped to answer all these types of questions, but yet that's who customers expect to be able to help them. And so in their case, they needed something like this more than any of our other customers, because now you can have customers asking other customers, and these other customers are more apt to be using the same apps who can help them. So we literally did a thing where we said, we are now gonna go and kind of like pivot and say, we're no longer selling to all these other like customers or use cases. Like, even if they're the biggest brands, even if they are asking to do something really, really cool, we switched and said, no, we're not selling that to them anymore. And we're only selling to telcos, and only if they're using it for a customer service use case. And you can imagine from a company perspective, when you have that many people, some people hired in for other things, like there was like kind of an uproar, so some people left, and a lot of people were really mad and upset. Some salespeople had like deals that were in outside of telcos that now we're saying, you can't close them. We even went as far to say, like, you're not going to get comped on it if it's something outside of this, which of course salespeople like really screamed at us. And of course, in the end, we made a couple exceptions when it was like, really, but the thing was like, we couldn't start from that point of view, because if we said that, then everyone would just like ignore the rule. And that one thing, which is just like, even at that scale, like narrowing it down to what most of us would probably say is a very niche like market, actually was what got our sales back on track, and then we, I think, doubled that year. So it goes to show, I mean, it taught me a lesson that it doesn't matter if you're small or you're big, like focus is like a really, really like important thing to hold on to, and more like companies die by indigestion than starvation. They're like trying to do too many things. Drew Houston from Dropbox, comes to YC and says this a lot in the journey that he's been through, and he was at a much bigger than Lithium ever was, but even then they were trying to expand into other products. They bought companies that helped them expand into other things, and they started getting into photos. They tried to compete with Google Photos and this and that, and he had the same story and the same lesson. Like, after a while, he realized he can't do all these things. The company was like, they need to compete and make sure they win on the core thing that they do really, really well, and he killed all those other products. But so this is like, even as the company scales, this is something we still have to focus on. So I thought I would kind of end this with just like a few key takeaways from this long journey that I've had through all these different companies. In the early days, communication is something we're terrible at with our co-founders and our early employees, but yet having honest and real, transparent conversations is super, super critical. And that can offset so many other problems so that you can push issues down the road and not have to deal with it so soon. Being honest about whether or not you have a strong product market fit is something that's really, really hard. Now that I'm on the dark side, I've looked at so many companies in Europe, like this probably is like the number one thing that I continuously see, which is that because like in the early days, some founder, usually some charismatic founder or founders, like are able to sell, and that you see this like traction graph that goes like, oh, look, check it out, we're like growing really fast, and now look at it, we're like at 2 million, 3 million euro ARR, et cetera. And so therefore we figured it out, and then they go and sell this to the VCs who go, oh yeah, you guys are like hit that inflection point, you must have hit product market fit, so therefore we're gonna give you a lot of money. And so in some ways we do this to ourselves, because then the next board meeting they tell us like scale, and then So then we just go scale, but then that's like basically throwing money away if we're not actually ready for it. And I think the reason for this is that most people think that revenue or bookings or ARR, whatever metric you want to use, depending on the type of business you're doing, we oftentimes don't look deep enough in the numbers to see if we actually have like product market fit where there's a need. And if you're talking about B2B, like probably the easiest one is like, are sales getting easier? And as you get more and more customers, and do you have churn? And so that's like, on the B2B side. But a lot of companies don't quite have product market fit yet. And the difficulty is pushing back on their VCs and saying, look, like, I know we just raised a bunch of money from you. I know we have I'm still, very ambitious. We have this like really big vision and we will get there, but I need like time to make sure that we are scaling the right thing when we're ready, not scale ahead of our product being ready. And this is, I would say, is probably one of the biggest things that I've seen, and it's super important. The next point that I probably hammered quite a bit as well was the fact that if you want to scale, unless you want to bring in have someone replace you as a CEO, you can only hire leaders who are as good as maybe wherever level of leadership you are. So what that means is the faster your company is growing, the faster you need to grow as a leader. And there's a lot of books and resources, and we all amongst like the founders, like we share stories and share resources, advice, and we read books as much as we can. We have mentors and coaches and anything we possibly can do. But literally, that is like you're climbing this thing as fast as you possibly can. And if you're lucky enough to be having hypergrowth, then this problem is magnified like tremendously, because 1 year you could be at 50, the next year you're at 200 people. Like leading that group with another set of like really strong leaders is super, super hard. If you're growing slowly, well, you're lucky because you probably can't hire the best people, and also you have more time to kind of like, because since your company's the number of people are not growing as fast as well, you have a little more time to deal with it. But regardless, it's the same problem. Like, if you want to hire really amazing people, then you need to first also be working on leadership and making sure that that doesn't fall behind. And it's usually on that steep curve of hypergrowth when at one point we fall behind and we're not capable of like managing and leading some really strong leaders. That's usually when a board would say, okay, well, I think it's time for us to find a replacement, someone who is a really strong leader. And last point on focus, it is something that is important at the early stages. It's also something that's important at scale. And I think some anecdotes on this, which has been so clear, is a lot of companies want to do so many things at the same time. Like they cut some early customers with some early product. They feel that in order to grow, they need to add a lot more products, a lot more modules. You call it whatever you want, but I mean, although it's hard to say, it's a case-by-case basis whether it's important or not. Generally speaking, like people try to do too much, and we were certainly guilty of this, trying to expand into this area, trying to expand on our product side, trying to do like different types of trying to get different customer segments, and ultimately building products that are trying to cater to too many people. And it took us a long time to figure this out. And it was so refreshing, and it was so enlightening when I finally realized that actually, by going narrow, we can grow faster and gain momentum, and then from that, we can grow bigger. And most of the successful companies started that way. And if you look at kind of like the history of a lot of the very successful companies, they kind of had to do this as well. But yet sometimes when we read articles in tech and TechCrunch or whatever it is, and all we hear about is like kind of like, oh wow, look, another unicorn status company, and then they just must have just gone like crazy growth and got straight there. They never went through all these ups and downs. But so far, I have yet to see and meet a founder who hasn't been through these ups and downs and learned these lessons in order to grow. So. Yeah.
Fong.